Horowitz's report is coming. We'll talk about that very briefly. NATO and ISIS and why the West has not defeated terrorism. Kamala Harris, Bloomberg News, and finally, your Christmas guide for your wife. All that's coming up right now on I'm Right. Well, A.G. Horowitz's report is coming out, and it is coming out very shortly. Allow me to prepare you for disappointment, but first let us read from the DOJ spokeswoman Kerr Kupek's tweet. Quote, "The Inspector General's investigation is a credit to the Department of Justice. His excellent work has uncovered significant information that American people will soon be able to read for themselves. Rather than speculating, people should read the report for themselves next week. Watch the Inspector General's testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee and draw their own conclusions about these important matters," blah, 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 blah. No, that's fine. You can speculate all you want. Here's what's going to happen. Allow me to prepare you for the future. A.G. Horowitz, I don't know the man. I don't know his motivations. I do know this. He was a Barack Obama appointee. He was also the one looking into Hillary Clinton's emails where there was bias after bias after bias after bias. And after spending so much time looking into it, he said, there's no bias. So prepare yourself for disappointment. There's going to be plenty of it. Don't worry, though. There are plenty of other reports coming. The report from Durham is the one you need to be looking out for. Shrug this off. It'll be big news for about 24 hours, and then everybody will move right along. There's your speculation, and there's what's coming in the future. Now, NATO, not exactly something everybody cares about on a day-to-day basis. Mostly American people don't care about foreign policy in general. Why? Because we're the best and we're surrounded by two big oceans and we don't have to care about anything we don't want to. But nevertheless, NATO is in the news, and the president of France, Macron, not sure if that's how you say his name in French, but I'm sure I got it pretty close. He doesn't like NATO very much.
Now, NATO serves a great purpose. It got to be unfair for the United States because the United States was paying a disproportionate amount. And I heard that President Macron said NATO is brain dead. I think that's very insulting to a lot of different forces, including a man that does a very good job in running NATO. No, it has a great purpose, especially with the fact that NATO is becoming much more flexible in terms of what it looks at. But I was very surprised.
Trump moved on there to talk about how NATO has actually grown stronger under his leadership.
NATO is becoming different than it was, much bigger than it was, and much stronger than it was because people are now fulfilling their commitments. There are some countries that aren't fulfilling their commitment, and those countries are going to be dealt with. Maybe I'll deal with them from a trade standpoint. Maybe I'll deal with them in a different way. I'll work something out where they have to pay. NATO's made a lot of progress over the last 3 years, and the word flexibility is very important. They're not just looking at one area now, they're looking at the world, and that's very important. To me, it's very important.
Now look, NATO's North America and Europe. We obviously know the United States of America carries the load on that. They were put in, it was basically created to keep a check on the Soviets and kind of Germany. That turned out to be not a major concern at the time. But France is what basically every other country in NATO is, except for us. France is a hanger-on. This is the problem with alliances, and I am not being critical of all alliances. Oftentimes, throughout history, alliances are necessary. They can save a nation, they can aid a nation, so this isn't some blank statement against alliances. But there's a reason the Founding Fathers were so emphatically warning against alliances, especially alliances with Europe. What do we get out of NATO? Let's see. We are the United States of America. We are by a country mile the most powerful military in the world. We are surrounded by allies, Canada to the north, Mexico to the south, although Mexico doesn't contribute very much. We have the Pacific Ocean here. We have the Atlantic Ocean here, meaning we have large bodies of water protecting us from the rest of the world and the best Navy in the world in those bodies of water to make sure nobody's coming. What I'm saying is, we are wealthy, we are powerful, we are isolated. Do we need NATO? No, of course not. We don't need NATO. NATO needs us. And countries like France really need NATO because a lot of people don't realize we provide the security for Europe. And I don't mean like we provide a troop or two. We are Europe's security. Do you know why they have so many socialist programs in Europe? and Europe still hasn't collapsed. Their unemployment rate is through the roof, but they haven't collapsed because they don't have to spend money on a military because we're their military. So when countries like France start complaining about NATO and brain dead and NATO should be doing this and NATO should be doing that, what they are is the leech complaining that the host is not providing enough blood. France is fine. I mean, they're fine. They're not more than fine. And they're certainly not providing more than we're providing to NATO. So all this is yet another example of a smaller country that leeches off of us through NATO, coming out and saying, you should be doing more. It's never we should be doing more when it comes to France or any of these other hangers-on countries. It's always you should be doing more. This is what you should be doing. Now, moving on from that. ISIS. They had a little talk about ISIS. Listen to this.
We have a tremendous amount of captured fighters, ISIS fighters, over in Syria. And they're all under lock and key. But many are from France, many are from Germany, many are from UK. They're mostly from Europe. And some of the countries are agreeing. I have not spoken to the president about that. Would you like some nice ISIS fighters?
Look,
I can give them
if
to
you
you.
look at the situation,
You can take everyone you want.
let's be serious. The very large number of fighters you have on the ground are ISIS fighters coming from Syria, from Iraq, and the region. It is true that you have foreign fighters coming from Europe, but this is a tiny minority of the overall problem we have in the region. And I think number one priority, because it's not yet finished, is to get rid of ISIS and these terrorist groups. This is our number one priority. And it's not yet done. I'm sorry to say that. You still have fighters in this region, in Syria and now in Iraq, and more and more. And the whole destabilization of the region makes the situation more difficult to fix the situation against ISIS. Second, some of these foreign fighters are being judged in Iraq because of the deeds precisely they acted in this very region. And we will have a case-by-case approach. We have a humanitarian approach for children, already organized, and we will have a case-by-case approach. But for me, the very first objective in the region is to finish war against ISIS. And don't make any mistake. Your number one problem are not the foreign fighters. This is the ISIS fighters in the region. And you have more and more of these fighters due to the situation today.
This is why he's a great politician, because that was one of the greatest non-answers I've ever heard.
All right, I'm about to say something that's really, really, really brutal, and many of you are going to disagree with me. We have no idea how to deal with terror in the United States of America. The West itself, France, Britain, we have no idea the proper way to deal with terrorists because nobody wants to address reality. Now, before I say what I'm about to say, I'm going to show you a brief clip. I didn't want to show the whole thing because it is very difficult to watch and it's ugly, but I'm going to show you a brief clip of a girl confronting an ISIS member who ripped her world apart when she was 14, because I want you to understand who we're dealing with when we're talking about ISIS. Watch this.
أنا كنت 14 سنة. أنا كنت عمر بنتك أو ابنك وعمر أختك. أنت دمرت حياتي. أخذ مني كل شيء اللي أنا أحلم فيه. كان يوم من الأيام أنا كنت بإيد داعش بإيدك، بس هسا أنت خلي أنت بتعرف شنو هو العذاب، شنو هو التعذيب، شنو هو الوحدة.
Obviously, I don't need to go into the details of what that young lady went through when she was 14 years old, and prayers out for her. But do you understand what kind of a monster you have to be to do that to other people? These people are monsters. You can make the transition as a human from being a human being to a freaking demon. And ISIS made that transition a long time ago. And in fact, they were proud of making that transition. And what do we have now? What do we have? It's embarrassing. we have thousands of ISIS fighters still breathing just in prisons in Syria and other places. We still have Guantanamo Bay here in the United States. I'm not just pointing fingers at everyone else, where we have these terrorists who've announced, oh, I'm going to go right back in the fight if you let us go. Well, so we don't let them go unless you're Barack Obama. So we're just going to keep them forever. We don't let them go. We have all these ISIS guys. Well, what should we do? We can't do anything hard. Why are they still alive? Why are they still alive? And don't give me this lofty thing about, well, we're better than that. Ladies and gentlemen, that kind of mercy to monsters is not better than anything. That's namby-pamby cowardice and failure to agree that you are facing a force that must be eradicated from the face of the earth like a deadly virus. Do you know why we still struggle with these things? Because we don't acknowledge you have to kill them all. I'm sorry if that made your feels uncomfortable, but it's 100% true. Kill them all. Every single member of ISIS dies. Tomorrow, shovel them in a freaking ditch somewhere, and let's move right along. Still dealing with ISIS makes me freaking sick. Coming up, former CIA officer Dan Gabriel. Hang on. Joining me now, one of my favorite people, former CIA officer, also director and producer of the film Mosul, which I would highly recommend, Dan Gabriel. Dan joins me now. Dan, we're going to talk a little ISIS today, a subject you may know just a little something about. And before I get into how we should deal with this, or how I think we should deal with it in the West, I figured we should actually ask somebody who's an expert on it, and that would be you. So explain the dynamic. I feel like a lot of people get confused about the dynamic because it's all just the big sandbox to people in America. You know, Syria, Iraq, all of it. They just view it as all one gigantic place. And that's not necessarily the case. So can you explain that a little bit, especially when it comes to dealing with groups like ISIS?
Absolutely. Rule number one with ISIS, keep ISIS in the sandbox. So if we don't want to get any more complicated than that, we need to think about a national security strategy policy that essentially keeps these fighters engaged in doing whatever it is that they want to do in that part of the world. And I think President Trump has the right instincts on that. We saw a little bit of back and forth with him and his meeting with Macron this afternoon, him joking about repatriating some of these ISIS fighters that were foreign fighters that came from France or Germany or other places in Europe back to those countries. We saw President Macron's response was a little bit more serious, a little bit, well, look, there's still a big problem that we need to focus on. So I do think the president is doing the right thing. It was a bit of a confusing few months that we had going back to September with the announcement that we would be leaving Syria, and then in fact we're actually back into Syria. At the end of the day, we've got to keep our eyes on the prize, which is ISIS. But what complicates that is what's going on in the rest of the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, and Iran. And the key part of those three countries right there is Iran. What Iran's facing right now is pushback against their policy in other countries like Lebanon and Yemen and Iraq, as well as in their own country. We saw the number of deaths, so 300 or 400 deaths just this weekend alone.
Now, why is Iran involved in any way with ISIS? Because I don't understand this, and you know this stuff, that the different terrorist cells and terrorist groups operate out of different countries where there are Sunnis and Shiites and all this. I understand that much of it. But does ISIS in Iran have any kind of link whatsoever? Is it just ISIS fills a vacuum that Iran can leave behind? What is the dynamic there?
That's right. ISIS fills a vacuum that Iran can fill, ISIS leaves a vacuum that Iran can fill, but it's also the other way around. And what we saw in Iraq and parts of Syria in 2014, 2015, is when Iran was more or less running Baghdad, running the country of Iraq after the United States left, we saw that power vacuum in Mosul was filled by ISIS. What we do in the film Mosul is we showed how all the different groups within Iraqi society came together and ultimately defeated ISIS in Mosul and, of course, across the border in Syria. And then we left the viewer with the question: what's next for the Middle East? Are the seeds planted for the next conflict? And in my estimation, they are, and that's what we see now. Iran doesn't want to be involved in Sunni parts of Iraq, other than they want to make sure that they have control over the Shia regions of both Iraq and, of course, Syria and Lebanon as well.
Now, what exactly happened? Bring people back now. I've seen the film, and I highly recommend other people to do the same. What happened in Mosul? Because I still remember this, and granted, I was half paying attention at the time. I was really busy. But I'm watching ISIS, and you see these horrible videos, and well, it's just some terrorists. I'm sure they'll work it out. And all of a sudden, they had control of a major city, and I will tell you, when it happened, it floored me at the time. I was, what? Who are these guys? How did some jerkwater terrorist cell become powerful enough to take a major city?
Sure, there's a couple of parts of that. Well, first of all, I think a lot of people, veterans like yourself, first of all, saw the fall of Fallujah and Ramadi as more shocking, and that, of course, happened before Mosul. Just in the time that you were involved in Iraq, Fallujah was conquered not once but twice by the U.S. military. So we recognize the significant sacrifice that went into freeing that city, not once but twice, and then ultimately a third time again after ISIS captured it. The difference with Mosul, and really this was not a U.S.-led operation. In fact, in the film, it shows the story of the Iraqi security forces that came together and did the fighting, of course, with the Americans, American Special Forces, SEAL teams just off camera, in providing air power and training and equipment. And in that, really, I think you have the model for our involvement, for the U.S.'s involvement in this part of the world, which is to build up capable and worthy partners and to have them do the fighting. That's why we put an Iraqi face on the film, because it ultimately needs to be an Iraqi story so that we don't have to continually have this conflict. But ultimately, the U.S. is going to have to remain involved in that part of the world.
Dan, explain this to me, because I went full Genghis Khan in the opening segment of the show, and that it drives me crazy watching the West, not just the United States, France, everybody, try to figure out how to deal with ISIS, as in the fighters they already have in their possession. We've struggled with this, less so with ISIS, but with Guantanamo Bay, we have terrorists there. We have thousands of ISIS prisoners in Syria right now sitting there, and I basically said, why are they still alive? Are we so civilized we can't deal with monsters like this the way monsters should be dealt with? But please tell me, am I a nut job? What should I be locked away? Why can't we deal with these people in a permanent way?
Well, you maybe should lock them away, but not for that reason, Jesse. So, look, I think if you want somebody in the region that can deal with these guys, probably Assad would do the best job of it, and it wouldn't be very humanitarian. And I don't think the folks at the UN and in Brussels would like it too much. But look, at the end of the day, you're right. There's 15 to 17,000 ISIS detainees in Syria and refugee camps in Iraq right now. The biggest problem is we don't know who's who. And you're going to have a situation where, in many cases, you're going to have the offspring of ISIS, the child of ISIS, the bride of ISIS that we're going to have to deal with. These are people that traveled from France, and including the United States, to go over there and join in this jihadist conquest dating back to 2013, 2014. And they're people without a state at this point. So the world is going to have to come together. NATO or somebody is going to have to get their act together and figure out what's the plan for these people, because they're not going to stay in refugee camps in Syria.
Yeah, you'll have to excuse me if I don't have a ton of confidence in NATO to figure out a proper way to deal with this problem. I very much worry so many of these people are just going to be back in European soil, or they'll be there forever, and we'll just sit and hand-wring about this entire thing. It absolutely drives me nuts to see us deal with this in a way that is just, frankly, in my opinion, not permanent enough. Now, explain this to me, and I realize this is a long, complicated question, so just keep it as short as you can. How does an American citizen, whatever, a mixed up young man somewhere, watch some YouTube videos or something, and suddenly find himself in Syria volunteering for an organization that openly advertises the fact we are monstrous, we rape, torture, pillage, and kill everything we can find? What is that mentality, Dan? How does one even get there? I can't understand it at all.
Well, it's not unlike the mentality that leads somebody to strap on a black trench coat and to go to shoot up a middle school, going back to the school shootings that we've had in this country. And it's simply wrapping yourself in the cloak of a different godless religion, in this case, a very, very ignorant and misinterpreted perception of Islam. to justify your acts, to justify the killing of other people and the taking away of human rights. My experience, and the U.S. government and certainly the Europeans have spent a lot of money on de-radicalization. The last example of de-radicalization gone wrong that we can see happened over the weekend with the guy on London Bridge that stabbed a couple people. He had been captured, he had been thrown in prison, he had been put through their de-radicalization programs. But the fact is, when you've got people that you're talking about right now, there really is no path back to civilization for them.
Former CIA officer, director, and executive producer of the film Mosul, Dan Gabriel, thank you so much for making us a bit smarter today.
Jesse, always a pleasure.
Be good. All right. Kamala Harris is gone. Bloomberg News is stupid. And I'll explain all that in a second. Hang on. Ladies and gentlemen, I come before you with a heavy heart tonight. Kamala Harris has dropped out of the presidential race. I'm not kidding. Kamala Harris took to Twitter earlier today and said, quote, "To my supporters, it is with deep regret, but also with deep gratitude that I am suspending my campaign today. But I want to be clear with you. I will keep fighting every day for what this campaign has been about. Justice for people, for the people, all the people." I love that we even had to get some extra dramatics in there. Kamala Harris is not doing some dramatic Shakespearean reading of her tweet before she sent that out there. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was why that campaign went into the toilet. Rest assured, it had all the makings of a campaign that should have been successful. You have an attractive California senator, obviously super powerful state. Rumors abounded that Barack Obama's campaign machine was behind her. She speaks really well. She has that attorney background. She's a black woman, so the media loved her for that. And it just didn't work. And you know why it didn't work? Because even if on paper you check every single box, all right, we've got California and we got enough money and she speaks really well. Even if you check all the boxes, the truth is you got to go out there and play the game. And voters, whether they be Democrat, Republican, Independent, no matter what, voters can smell a phony 10 miles away. Now, I realize what you're saying. Oh, they're all phony. That's right. To an extent, every politician is phony. But there's phony, and then there's Kamala Harris, who takes 10 different sides to every single issue. This was always going to be a massive dud. All right, moving on from that. Bloomberg News, Michael Bloomberg's news organization, obviously, clearly he took some time to name that. They had made an announcement that was bizarre. They announced that they're not going to cover Michael Bloomberg critically now that he's in the Democrat race. They said they're not going to cover any of the Democrats in the race critically. Wait, what? But that's what they did. And you can understand they would have a bit of a conflict of interest there. So essentially they washed their hands of any of it. Now, what I would say to Bloomberg News, wouldn't the smarter move have been just move forward doing that without announcing that you're doing that? There are so many things in life that you should do, but not necessarily announce to everybody that you're doing. Yes, honey, I realize you burnt dinner to a crisp. It's really good. And then at some point in time, I'm going to get up after I take some fake bites and maybe she's messing with the kids and I'll kind of walk over to the trash can and just kind of slip her on in there and maybe step out, run to the gas station real quick for a burger. What I don't do is stand up and say, boy, this was gutter trash. I'm tossing it. Hope you don't mind. There are things you should just do without announcing you're doing. And of course, since Bloomberg News was stupid enough to announce that they're actually doing that, well, you didn't think that was going to get by President Donald Trump or his campaign staff. President Trump went to Twitter right away and said, quote, "Mini Mike Bloomberg has instructed his third-rate news organization not to investigate him or any Democrat, but to go after President Trump only. The failing New York Times thinks that is okay because their hatred and bias is so great they can't even see straight. It's not okay." He puts, and of course he had to put the exclamation point there. Well, Bloomberg News responded. Their editor, John Micklethwaite, on my life, I'm not making that up. Editor John Micklethwaite said, and I quote, "The accusation of bias couldn't be further from the truth. We have covered Donald Trump fairly and in an unbiased way since he became the candidate, and will continue to do so. So despite the restrictions imposed by the Trump campaign, despite the restrictions imposed by the Trump campaign. I basically screwed up the entire reading of that. Whatever. That's why we put up the full screen so you can read it yourself. I went to community college. Well, Trump campaign manager Brad Parscale said, quote, since they have declared their bias openly, the Trump campaign will no longer credential representatives of Bloomberg News for rallies or other campaign events. We will determine whether to engage with individual reporters or answer inquiries from Bloomberg News on a case-by-case basis. This will remain the policy of the Trump campaign until Bloomberg News publicly rescinds its decision. Now, what do you make of all this? Well, here's what you make of all of it. Obviously, the Trump campaign said, well, you're not getting credentials anymore. Sorry. Press credentials, for those of you who don't realize it, are a pretty big deal. It gets you backstage access. It gets you, at all those Trump rallies, he'll show up at a stadium, okay? He's in a basketball stadium. Picture that. And everybody's lined up on the floor, and then people are lined up in the stands, and they are an event. I've been to one before. If you haven't been to one, I highly recommend it. Well, 100 feet, 200 feet, depending on the venue, away from the stadium. Trump's standing here, away from the stadium. There's this gigantic platform that rises up above all the people, and that's where he puts all the press. That's where all the cameras are, the reporters are. I mean, all of them. MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, all of them. Everybody's there. We're there. Everybody's there. That's where you stand. Well, when you see him pointing, it always looks like he's pointing up or basically even with his eyes. That's because they are even with these eyes. Whatever, that's a little too inside baseball. The point of it is you need press credentials to stand on that stage. If you don't get press credentials to stand on that stage, you're not going to get the video you want. You're not going to get the access you want. It is going to bother Bloomberg News. It is a nice move. It is a nice shot back at them. Now, what do you make of it? I'm not asking you to give a crap about Bloomberg News. I don't give a crap about Bloomberg News. What you should take from this is Donald Trump is teaching the Republican Party a valuable lesson. Hit back. Always hit back. It is important to do so. It is important to treat the media like what they are. You don't have to go full, the media is the enemy of the people. You can if you want to. But what you must do, it is important for you to constantly drive home to the public that the media is not the media. They're not news media. They are the communication wing of the Democrat Party. That's why all the coverage is slanted that way. We know for a fact over 90% of the people in newsrooms and the production staff are Democrats. That just is kind of the way it works. So stop treating them like the media. And sadly, that's how so many Republicans go to Washington, D.C. and lose their way. We've all seen it time and time again. They'll campaign on, I won't let you down. I'll go to Washington and shake things up. I'll go to Washington and fight for you. And then, doesn't take long usually, a year or two, and they're meekly going up to the camera. Well, I mean, I really just think we should be more moderate on this issue. You guys like that, right? Does that get your approval? What happens is Republicans go to Washington, D.C., and they eventually wear down, and they get beaten down. And they're tired of walking from their congressional office to their car and getting hounded by reporters every day. Why are you a Nazi? Why are you the devil? And so they break because they're seeking the approval of people who are against them. It is the wrong mentality to take. I'm not saying you should walk out of your congressional office and push over any reporter you see, but you should walk out of your congressional office and look at all the reporters and think, oh, the Democrats are here. Because they are. Coming up to talk about that and maybe some Kamala Harris stuff, Blaze TV host John Miller. Hang on. Joining me now, one of my favorite people in the world, Blaze TV host John Miller. John, before we get into Bloomberg and crazy YouTube and everything else, I would be remiss if I did not get the John Miller reaction to Kamala the Cop Harris dropping out of the race today. What say you?
Well, Al Sharpton's very upset. I saw Al Sharpton on Twitter. He said that there's going to be no black people in the next debate. And when you look at everything through the lens of race, that's really unfortunate. So he's devastated. But I think he's probably the only person out there who is devastated because, what was she polling at 2%? And, you know, and even in her own state, California, polling at 5%, it wasn't even guaranteed that she'd win her own state. So, I mean, she really just fell like a rock. It was incredible. She had that first debate, and then she kind of just fizzled out. And it was actually amazing to watch someone just fall that badly. And now she's out of money, and her campaign has collapsed. So it's a shame.
John, I realize a lot of the stuff we don't know because each campaign has its own inside baseball stuff that tells its own tale. But you do this for a living. You're inside the Beltway. Why did it fail? Because look, from an outsider perspective, especially when she launched, I thought this was a campaign that was going to go someplace. Love her or hate her, and I obviously don't like Kamala Harris. She speaks really well. She has that attorney background. She looks really good. Don't argue with me, John. She does. She's an attractive woman. I like it. All that was in her favor. She's a black woman, which means the press fell in love with her right off the bat. I remember they were doing little photo shoots where they were out photoshopping for jackets together, and it was a big rah, rah, rah thing. I thought everything was there for her to make some waves that everyone was talking about behind the scenes. Obama really liked her, maybe was pushing some support her way, and she just sucked. Why?
Yeah, well, apparently, I mean, from what I hear, she's a very talented politician, and even in person, she is very dynamic. You saw that letter that came out that was from a staffer that basically just said she ran her campaign into the ground. She didn't know how to run a campaign. There were money issues there. And so I think it really came down to management, and the staff seemed to be very unhappy. They were letting off a lot of staff, and the way they were let off apparently was not good. But just in terms of messaging, she could never quite figure out, she couldn't figure out, am I going to be a radical, woke black sister, or am I going to be, the hard-ass prosecutor? And she could never figure out whether she wanted to join the radicals or whether she wanted to be the more moderate one, the more reasonable one. And, she waffled on Medicare. She was all over the place with Medicare for all. And so I think she never just figured out who exactly she wanted to be as a candidate. And there's clearly two very different positions on the left, and she could never figure out which one she fell into. So I think that mixed with the mismanagement of her campaign really did not do her any favors.
That is a fact. If you don't know what you stand for as a politician, if you'll pardon the pun, it is a tough road to hoe. Now, Bloomberg News, that they obviously made an announcement that came out once Michael Bloomberg jumped in. Everybody heard about it. Hey, we're just not going to cover Bloomberg critically. And you know what? We're not going to cover any of the Democrats critically. Trump, what I think was a brilliant move, his campaign comes out and says, okay, well, you're not credentialed at our campaign events anymore. And my question is, John, why would Bloomberg News be that stupid to make an announcement? They should have just done what everyone else in the news media does, which is not cover Democrats critically and rip on Trump all day. You don't have to announce it.
And that's what they said. That's what the Trump campaign said in their letter. They said they openly admitted and acknowledged their bias, and that's why we're not letting them cover our campaign. So that was really stupid on their part. You saw that video of Bloomberg saying, oh, Xi Jinping, he's not a dictator. Xi Jinping, he's responsible. He has to answer to his constituents. And the reporter, I don't remember her name, so, some female reporter sitting there, she's like, what are you talking about? And it's because for someone like Bloomberg, he doesn't see someone like Xi Jinping as a dictator because he himself is a dictator. He owns a media company who has directed, don't cover me critically, don't investigate me, and in fact, don't even cover any of the Democrats because we're just going to cover Donald Trump critically. So you literally have the stenographers for the left in Bloomberg News. And so, of course, he doesn't see the dictator of China as a dictator because he himself operates like that, like one. I mean, when he was mayor of New York, he said, we're going to tax the poor. The poor don't know what's good for them. We're going to tax them so that they don't drink sugary drinks, which you're out of touch when you call soda sugary drinks. I've heard someone call it pop. I know in some places in the country they call it Coke. But sugary drinks is not used by anybody to refer to soda. But Bloomberg calls it sugary drinks. So he was a dictator in New York. He's a dictator now. And this is just another example of his authoritarian ways, not letting his news outlet cover the Democrats critically.
Well, not that I want to take a controversial stance or anything, but if you say the word Coke to refer to all soda, you are a nut job. Pop, I can absolutely understand. Coke is a certain brand of soda. It's a certain brand of pop. Yeah, what are these people thinking? All right, back to Bloomberg.
I can't argue. That's not that controversial. What kind of Coke? What are you talking about?
Why run if you're Michael Bloomberg, John? I honestly don't understand it. Like you mentioned, he has a media empire. He's a billionaire. The guy has something, I'm not joking, like 42 cars. He has private jets, I believe multiple private jets. He's living the last years of his life. Not that he's about to die or anything like that, but he's an older gentleman. He's living the high life, the last years of his life. Why in the world would you throw yourself into something like this when anybody on the outside looking in can say, look, some munchkin from New York City that's 5 feet tall and he always looks like he just stepped on a thumbtack is not going to be president of the United States.
I think he has 11 homes too, something insane like that. But at a certain point, old, rich, short men just get bored. And he's like, well, what else can I do? I have all my homes. I have all my cars. I guess I'm just going to run for president. And I don't know what's going through his head. I don't know who is advising him. He clearly should be spending more money on advisors that are actually going to tell him, look, dude, you have no shot in hell at winning this thing. But they're not. And then, he's had this happy, he was a Republican, then he was a Democrat, then he was a Republican, a Democrat again. He's all over the place. No one takes him seriously. He wasn't even he's not going to appeal to moderate Democrats because of his stuff like gun confiscation and his nanny state ways, but he's not going to appeal to the radical ones either because of his stop and frisk positions. So he's a little all over the place. But I think he has I think he has a Napoleonic complex or something. Something's driving him to think I have to go for the biggest thing out there, which is obviously being president of the highest office in the land.
John, the tech companies are no joke. These are massively, massively powerful companies, especially companies like Google and Facebook. They know more information about you and me than I ever want to know. I don't even want to know all the things they know about me. And now they're getting involved. Well, not now. They've been involved in politics. They're taking the side of China often. And YouTube even has something new they're doing. What's YouTube doing?
Well, YouTube, I just saw the interview with Susan Wojcicki, and they are actually talking about. This is not new actually, and there might be something new coming down the pike that I don't know about. But what I do know is that they now have 10,000 employees that they're using to monitor their videos. So there's all this talk, and especially in the space that I'm in, where we get a lot of our traffic from internet, people watching on the internet. On sites like YouTube, it's not an algorithm that we're talking about. They actually are employing 10,000 people who sit there and watch for controversial content. And you're wondering, these people are not exactly going to be non-biased. These are going to be as biased as anyone in Silicon Valley. And so this idea, Howley has that legislation out that he's been working on since the summer that would say, Google, if they want to be considered a platform, they're going to have to expose their algorithm and show that the algorithm isn't biased. We're not talking about algorithms. You think all the people who have been kicked off these social media platforms, that was determined by an algorithm? That was determined by an individual who said, I don't like this person offends me, and they get kicked off the platform. So it's really dangerous what they're doing, and I think that at a certain point, you just have to call them out for it, because what do we do? We're really going to let these social media companies determine what we can say to each other and how we can say it and who's allowed to access information and who's not. So they're just getting worse and worse and worse. And if they have made a new announcement, I shudder to think what it is, because they know that they have no constraints, and they know that no one is able to touch them because they're the most powerful companies. Google is the most powerful company in the world. Who's going to stick it to Google? And, the libertarian-minded people have to wonder, okay, well, is government regulation the answer? Because usually you shun from that. But when you have the company that's the most powerful company in the world and they're just running rampant and trampling on people's speech rights, what do you do?
Well, you hope and you pray, and you certainly have to do something, because the status quo ain't going to work out very well for people like you and me. John Miller, Blaze TV host, thank you for giving us some time tonight, my friend.
Amen. Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate it.
All right. We've got more coming. Hang on. The holiday season is upon us. I know so many of you are out there Christmas shopping. And look, this season can actually get stressful. I get things all the time from people that say, Jesse, you're so smart. What should I buy my husband? What should I buy my wife for Christmas? Look, you don't have to stress about it. The perfect gift is out there for the one you love. And that's why I'm so excited about this new ad on TV. Look, fellas, if you're looking for something to get the wife, look no further than this.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Now.
A Peloton? Give it up for our first time ride.
All right, first ride. I'm a little nervous, but excited. Let's do this. 5 days in a row. You surprised? I am.
6 a.m. Yay.
Rising with the sun.
That was totally worth it.
Let's go, Grace in Boston. 50 rides.
She just said my name. A year ago, I didn't realize how much this would change me. Thank you.
This holiday, give the gift of Peloton.
Indeed. Talk about the way to a woman's heart. What better way to a woman's heart than by making her heart stronger by exercising? Get her an exercise bike. Look, if you really want to dig in, if you feel like maybe you had a good year, don't be afraid to throw in some pots and pans, maybe a new dishwasher, maybe a new dryer. Women hate a bad dryer. Get her a new dryer, but get her something that she can use. Take it from me, fellas. Women love to exercise, and they want to know that you want them to exercise. That's all for tonight's show on I'm Right. We will be back with lots more tomorrow. Hang on.